Yep.
See that?
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Okay. Good to go, Tracy. Right. So the first thing I need to say is please can everybody make sure they're on mute. Otherwise, we're going to have some horrible feedback. Um, so, Tracy, have you managed to do that? Is that all good? Yep. Okay.
Right.
So, first, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. Not only will I be speaking, but also Ian Hancock, who many of you will have met on previous webinars. He's Montgomery COO. He'll be talking to you first. We also have our guest speaker, Anthony Willis, who's senior economist from Columbia Threadneedle. Many of our clients are holding CT MAP funds in their portfolio, so I know you'll be interested to hear from Anthony. A little bit of housekeeping. Keep on mute, please. That would be lovely. If you would like to ask some questions, then you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, you should have a little icon with chat on it. Please type questions. We're not going to be able to cover questions during our session because we're going to try as far as possible to stick to the 45-50 minutes, but we will certainly follow up with answers. And as Tracy just said, she's recording the session because we've got several clients who are traveling at the moment, want to catch up. We will be sending a link to the session after we finished. So if you want to watch it again or share it, you're very welcome to do so. So let's just quickly go through our agenda for today. Firstly, Ian is going to cover the key announcements in our last budget. I'm then going to talk about the impact for our clients. We're going to cover a few inheritance tax planning strategies. Then we're going to have a refresher on investment bonds. And we're going to talk a little bit about the ultimate savings plan. And those who've been on previous post-budget webinars will remember a little bit about that. Perhaps we're going to review pensions, the impact of the budget on pensions. And then our guest speaker, Anthony, is going to be covering the economic and market update. Then Ian will be talking a little bit about what potentially is coming next. And we'll conclude with a few key takeaways and action points. So without any further ado, Ian, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk you through the sort of key announcements out of the recent budget. And despite many of the rumours and speculation that were well trailed, certainly in the media before the budget, that it didn't actually radically change the tax system for retirees. But what it did do was it introduced several important measures that will affect those of you with savings, investments, and in some cases, changes relating to long-term planning for families. So I'm going to walk you through the key points. I'll canter through these relatively quickly, but the ISA cash allowance for under 65s was reduced down to £12,000 from April 2027. For over 65, it remains at 20,000. And this, I think, was in fairness driven by a move to get people away from favouring cash over investments as a long-term way of saving. So I think that was the motivation primarily behind that. Lifetime ISAs, probably none of us or none of you will have, but children and grandchildren may have. There is a consultation under review by the government to see if they can find a new ISA aimed at first-time buyers. So that work is happening. The salary sacrifice national insurance cap for relief was reduced. It's now come in at £2,000. So only the first £2,000 qualifies for full national insurance relief. That will affect people who are perhaps working late into their careers, they're business owners, or those people who are still able to direct large sums of money into pensions. So that will have an impact on those people. Ahead of a full-blown wealth tax, the government have introduced this phrase called the mansion tax, which is based upon property values. So if you've got a property property worth between 2 million and 2.5 million, then there'll be an additional £2,500 payment on top of your council tax. 2.5 million to 3.5 million, then it comes out at £3,500. 3 million to 5 million, it's 5,000 additional cost. And for those people living in properties valued over 5 million, it'll be a £7,500 increase on your council tax. So quite a change there. Interestingly, I don't know if some of you read the article last night that was trailing the fact that there's already likely to be some issues around that, and valuers up and down the country could be swamped with people putting in appeals already about the value of their homes, and they're saying they haven't got enough valuers to handle that. So already some sort of a potential fallout in terms of the logistics of how that will work. In terms of rental income tax, that's gone up by 2%. So that will again increase the costs to those people with second homes or holiday homes. And alongside that, there was also increases to the dividend tax and the saving income tax of another 2%, whilst keeping the thresholds for both those frozen. So that'll impact quite significantly on people who are living off dividend income, rental income, or savings interest. So again, quite a big change. I think it was, again, well trailed that the freeze on income tax thresholds was likely to be extended, and that goes up to 2030, 2031. So that will continue to widen what's termed as stealth taxation. So big changes there that will impact much further down the line. Probably won't affect many people on the call today, but the £1 million business agricultural relief allowance is now transferable between spouses and civil partners if it's unused on the first death, and that comes into place from April next year. And again, those of us, or I don't have one, but if you do have an electric car, then you are liable now for another 3p a mile for a full electric car and 1.5p for a plug-in hybrid. So there's quite a significant number of structural changes that have taken place, and all of those will require some thought and some planning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over back to Katie, and she'll talk you through some of those strategies.
Thank you, Ian. So let's go through some of the impacts for our clients. For most of our clients who are retirees and those approaching retirement, budget measures really just mean one thing, and that's that the tax system is becoming less generous for savers and wealth holders. More wealth will fall into the inheritance tax net with the frozen thresholds. Families will need to be efficient with their wrappers, investment wrappers for cash, pensions and investments, including bonds, in order to maximise the opportunities that they've got going forwards. We feel that planning earlier will produce better outcomes. It will potentially be less expensive to solve the challenges, and it will create more flexibility in financial planning, particularly relevant perhaps to those who want to pass wealth on to their children and future generations of the family. So we're just going to go through some of the inheritance tax strategies. Somebody's not on mute. Can we just make sure everybody's on mute? Thank you. Before we do that, let's just have a quick refresher on where we are with inheritance tax. So everybody has £325,000 worth of nil rate band. And if we have a property that we're ultimately leaving to our children, then we benefit from the residence nil rate band of £175,000 each. So for a couple, that's a total of £1 million that they can pass on as a maximum, free of inheritance tax. But be careful, when the estate goes over £2 million in value, we start to lose that residence nil rate band, £1 for every £2 over 2 million. And so for a couple, if the estate exceeds £2.7 million in value, we've completely lost that residence nil rate band. We're back to 2 lots of £325,000 nil rate band. So we know that these thresholds are frozen until at least tax year 29-30. And by the time we get there, that'll be 20 years of no movement in those thresholds. So again, many more estates, including the estates of our children, are already being caught by the inheritance tax net. We're expecting to, or the government are expecting to receive £9.1 billion this year in inheritance tax receipts, and that's more than 10% increase over last year. So this is really plugging quite a big hole for them, and we don't see it going down. So some of those strategies for reducing inheritance tax: making gifts and living for 7 years while we still have that 7-year gifting opportunity. That was one of the rumoured changes, that it would be a 10-year period before we can get gifts outside of our estate. So doing that sooner rather than later sounds like a good idea if you're planning to do it. Be careful about mixing gifts through trusts, chargeable lifetime transfers, and outright gifts, pets, potentially exempt transfers, because the two don't mix very well. Come and talk to us if you would like some advice there. And one thing that I always say, because people expect there to be taper relief on their gifting, taper relief only applies to gifting if you've given more than £325,000 away during the last 7 years. So just keep that in mind. The inheritance tax exemptions include making gifts out of regular income that don't reduce your standard of living. For example, many of our clients like to help family cover the cost of school fees or university fees, covering the cost of music lessons, for example, helping their children make pension investments or repay mortgages. But careful planning is needed. Again, please talk to us if you feel like you'd like to incorporate this. We've got some template letters for regular gifting. Please ask if you need them. Annual exemption allowance of £3,000 each you can give away, plus small gifts of £250 to individuals. Those are all included in the inheritance tax exemptions. Leaving gifts to charities or your own charitable trust. If you leave 10% of your net estate to charity, it reduces the prevailing rate of inheritance tax from 40% to 36% on your taxable estate. So something worth thinking about. Also, portfolios that are heavy in capital gains tax. Giving those directly to charities means you don't pay the capital gains tax, they don't pay the capital gains tax, so that can be very efficient. We always say make sure wills and trusts are up to date. That is the starting point as far as we're concerned for any tax planning strategies. Not only for our estates, but it helps our children's estates and our grandchildren's estates, and we can do some very effective inheritance tax planning. It's also essential for passing gifts or keeping gifts within our bloodline. So again, check that they're up to date. Using trusts is so important for death time gifting and lifetime gifting, and thinking about making sure that we've got trusts wrapped around life cover and investments and pensions and death in service benefits where we can. For our legacy protection clients with asset preservation trusts around pensions, there will be a bit of work to do ahead of April 2027, but we will be on hand to advise you. Thinking now about investment bonds, and the reason why I particularly draw attention to investment bonds, and we just have a refresher here, is that we feel that they are the wrapper of the future, and certainly something to add to a suite of wrappers in a portfolio for effective tax planning. Why do I think that? Well, the growth in investment bonds is capital gains tax free. In the main, capital investment bonds are divided into 1,000 segments, so real flexibility in terms of gifting segments to family members or beneficiaries, or wrapping part of the bond in a trust at outset or at a later stage. They are a very useful alternative investment wrapper when we think about ISA allowances being affected, dividend taxes rising, capital gains tax relief reducing or disappearing. They can be set up on a single life basis or a joint life basis. I think they're absolutely fabulous for turning on income at a later stage, particularly for a surviving spouse if there's a disparity in pension income. They can continue beyond death, so you can be more strategic about when funds are paid out to beneficiaries. can access all the Montgomery multi-asset funds through an investment bond, and it's certainly the right investment wrapper to hold within a trust, because as far as the revenue are concerned, it's deemed to be a non-income producing asset and therefore more easy to account for it as you go along. Just going to talk about the ultimate savings plan. And if you were on our last post-budget webinar, you will have heard me talk about the ultimate savings plan. Well, what is it? It's actually a whole of life insurance policy. It can be set up on a joint life basis or a single life basis, and it's really become a lot more popular since the autumn budget last year, with the introduction of pension values being included in the estate for inheritance tax purposes post April 27, thinking about how we can use the pension pot to help cover inheritance tax liabilities. So why does this work so well? Well, the benefit of a whole of life insurance policy is it can be paid into a trust on second death, so it keeps the value outside of the estate for inheritance tax purposes. It provides really important liquidity to our loved ones ahead of the grant of probate being received and before the inheritance tax liability needs to be paid. So that's a real benefit. In most cases, it's extremely cost effective. That's why we call it the ultimate savings plan. And I'll show you some figures in a minute as to why it's so cost effective. There's a guaranteed payout as long as premiums are paid, and the premiums are guaranteed too, so you know where you are from the outset. We're going to touch on a few examples. Oh no, we're not. We're going to talk about how to pay for it first. So this is a huge question when we're talking about whole of life, because whole of life premiums are not for the faint-hearted. And when we get to the retirement stage of life, they really are not for the faint-hearted. So how do we pay for it? So, it's time to reconsider those cash holdings. It's time to reconsider how much is sitting in ISA investments as well, what we've got sitting in pension pots, thinking about investment bonds and taking withdrawals from those to cover or help cover the premiums, any surplus rental income or surplus income generally. And I also want to talk about income from discounted gift plans and trusts. So what is a discounted gift trust? This is where we start to bring together the whole of life insurance with an investment, okay, for the benefit of inheritance tax planning. And discounted gift plan or trust is simply an investment bond that's written in a specific discounted gift trust. The advantage of it is there's an immediate discount for inheritance tax purposes. So, for example, if you invest £100,000 into a discounted gift plan, then there's typically between 30 and 35% immediate discount. So £35,000 is immediately outside of the estate for inheritance tax purposes, and the rest of the investment falls outside after the 7-year time has elapsed. Regular withdrawals from the investment are set up at outset, and this is what is used to help fund the ultimate savings plan, the whole of life insurance policy. It's important that I mention that underwriting is necessary to confirm exactly what the discount is, but it's usually between 30 and 35%, as I say. So let's have a look at an example here. Here we have a property-rich couple, Paul 72 and Margaret 70. Their estate value is at that £2 million place, and it's made up of the value of their main home, their holiday home, and their investments. And we're assuming that the holiday home is around £500,000 or £600,000 of that value. The expected tax liability is £400,000 because as a couple, Paul and Margaret have the £1 million tax-free and £1 million taxable at 40%. They really don't want the children to have to sell the holiday home. That's an important thing for them. So we're looking at the solutions that are available to them using the whole of life insurance and discounted gift plan. So they could just go and take out a whole of life insurance policy for £400,000. And you'll be interested to know that the premium for Paul and Margaret would be £763.81 today for £400,000. And if they've got surplus income that's just accumulating in their current account, their savings account, that's a good thing to spend it on. Alternatively, they might take out some joint life, second death, whole of life insurance, £250,000, let's say, and that would cost £480 a month. And if they've got spare cash or funds in their ISA portfolios, they would need to reposition £165,000 of that into a discounted gift trust and take a 3.5% income from it, and that will pay the £480 per month premium. Both policies are written in trust, and so the benefits fall outside of the estate after the 7 years for the discounted gift trust. And the outcome there is that the children receive cash very quickly to help them pay the inheritance tax on second death. No asset sale is actually required. They get to keep the holiday home and the main residence if they want to. So in summary, repositioning £165,000 of investment into a discounted gift trust investment bond, taking an income of 3.5% withdrawal, covers the £480 per month premium for £250,000 worth of whole of life insurance, both of which are in trust. And either Paul or Margaret would need to live for over 43 years before the premiums paid for the life insurance exceed the £250,000 value. And that's why we call it such good value, very cost effective. Again, that's based on standard life rates, and if there's a medical situation, the premium might be slightly higher. But I have to say, we've arranged these policies for clients whose premiums have been rated, and it still makes very good planning sense. And so in this scenario, we've provided hopefully over £400,000 worth of benefits, tax-free to the family, and payable before inheritance tax is needed to be paid and before the grant of probate is received. We hope that £165,000 investment will actually increase in value over the years. We feel that 3.5% withdrawal is modest, and certainly if you look back on any rolling 10-year period of time, you'd expect the returns to be greater than 3.5%. So that £165,000 would go up in value as well. A few more examples here. £300,000 joint life second death life cover for a male aged 63 and a female aged 60 costs £359 per month. One of them would have to live for 70 years before the premiums paid equal the sum paid out. And actually an investment of £123,000 and a withdrawal of 3.5% would cover the premium. And of course, you've got the value of the investment on top of the life cover. £250,000 worth of life cover for a single life, male age 75 or female age 75. You can see that premium is much higher for a single life, £869. But if they've got £300,000 that's sitting in an ISA portfolio, they might decide to take some income from that to cover the cost of life cover. £500,000 joint life second death life cover for male age 68, female age 67 would cost £772 per month. One of them would have to live for 54 years from taking the policy out before the premiums paid equaled the amount that's paid out on death into trust and free of inheritance tax. An investment of £265,000 and a withdrawal of 3.5% would cover the premiums. So I think you can see if it works, and it doesn't work for everybody, but if it works, it's why we call it the ultimate savings plan. So in summary, taking extra income from pension, we can look at the tax-free cash tax-free cash and invest that in a discounted gift trust to produce income. We can look at ISA portfolios and cash portfolios to invest in discounted gift trusts. We could pay the capital gains tax on a general investment account or a share portfolio and reinvest in a bond for this purpose. It's worth noting that ISAs are brilliant for accumulating tax-efficient capital during our working life, but they are not brilliant for estate planning. And if you've done a very good job during working life, it perhaps gives the opportunity now to reposition some of that in the retirement phase for inheritance tax planning. So let's now just touch on pensions and the new rules. There have been two big changes since the Labour government came in, and the first came in last autumn budget, and that is from April 2027. Pension values will be included in the estate for inheritance tax calculations. That is immediately going to put a lot of estates over the £2 million, a lot of our children's estates over the £2 million threshold, where they start to lose the residence nil rate band. So it's something to watch. And I think perhaps the unintended consequences of this particular change are the very complex calculations that are now going to be necessary on death. There are actually 3 different ways to calculate how this is paid, or the payment of the inheritance tax. Who's responsible for that calculation? Our personal representatives, our executors. So we feel that probate services are going to be essential going forward, just to deal with this pension aspect. 2029, we've already heard salary sacrifice national insurance relief cap kicks in. So that's going to render salary sacrifice perhaps not that attractive going forwards. But some of our children might be involved in that. So again, if help is needed for restructuring pension planning, please do give us a call. I am now very pleased to hand over to our guest speaker, Anthony Willis, who's going to share his insights into where we are now from an economic perspective and what we can expect in 2026. So Anthony, welcome, and I'm handing over to you.
Thank you. Nice picture of a younger looking me there. So thanks very much for letting me join you this morning. This is this was my 34th budget working in the City of London. So I've been covering markets and economics since 1997. And as mentioned at the start, I'm the senior economist at Columbia Threadneedle in London, and our team more broadly is responsible for the universal map portfolios. So what I'll do today is just briefly talk through our thoughts on the budget, obviously coming at a very different angle from you guys in terms of talking more about financial markets than personal finance. And then I'll talk more broadly about our views of the world. And while we're not that positive on the outlook for the UK, when we think more from the top down and our more broad asset allocation, and we obviously invest globally, there's a lot of good things going on right now. So Tracy, if you can go on to the next slide, please. Oh, maybe the next one. We don't want to look at the disclaimer too long. So yeah, so the next slide. So so let's start with the budget itself. Our view was it was very much a spend now, tax later budget. A lot of the benefits from the budget in terms of additional spending come now, and then the tax increases are very much back end loaded. And what I mean by that is they come at the end of the forecast horizon. So the forecast horizon from the budget goes out to 2029, 2030, and most of the pain from tax rises really comes in the last few years of that horizon. Also worth bearing in mind, having been told last year in the budget, when they raised £40 billion, they wouldn't really be coming back for a lot more. They raised another £26 billion, and that was the 3rd biggest tax raising budget since 2010. Financial markets liked what they heard. A few of the reasons for that was because of the what's called the fiscal headroom. So this is kind of the safety blanket that the Chancellor has in place to make sure they have enough money at the end of the financial year to cover all their commitments. And that increased to over £20 billion. That was bigger than expected, and certainly was bigger than the Chancellor was hinting at before the budget was taking place. That's below the long-term average, but it's a lot better than it was, and that's encouraging. The other thing that financial markets liked was the debt management office. So these guys are responsible for issuing all the government debt, the money that the government needs to borrow, and they're issuing less than financial markets were expecting, only by £6 billion, but it all helps. And also how they're borrowing the money also helps. So what they've been doing recently is borrowing money at what is called the long end of the yield curve, so like 30-year debt, for example. Now they're starting to use much shorter dated government bonds, and again that will help the government with liquidity. It also helps against a backdrop of falling interest rates, which is exactly what we're expecting, certainly over the next 12 months. So in terms of the numbers, we do get that £11 billion of spending increases. A lot of that goes on welfare spending. And as I mentioned, £26 billion worth of tax rises. Borrowing from the government does indeed rise over the next 2 years, and then it falls back by the end of the forecast period in 2029, 2030. As expected, as we all know, there were a lot of leaks before the budget in terms of what was going on. The Chancellor herself was partly to blame for that. And they chose what we describe as the smorgasbord approach to the tax planning. So what they've actually done, instead of using what was feared by many, big increases to income taxes, they've gone for lots of small taxes, many of which Ian and Katie have already mentioned, to try and raise this revenue over time. Now, as you mentioned, the complications around the Manson tax highlight some of the issues of trying to raise lots of small taxes. It's quite inefficient. It often doesn't raise as much money as the government might hope. So this could become a problem over time. And again, a lot of these issues are pushed down the road. So the forecast is the tax burden overall rises to 38% of the entire economy by 2029, and that's the highest level on record. So Tracy, if you can go to the next slide. So in terms of the Office for Budget Responsibility, who've obviously lost their head overnight, thanks to the leak that came out before the budget, which from my point of view was very helpful, giving us extra 40 minutes to plan things. But their forecast didn't really move because of the budget. So they said that the budget was kind of neutral, really. It didn't benefit growth. It wasn't negative for growth. But their forecasts overall for economic growth for the UK were brought down. So they expect the UK economy to grow this year by 1.5%. That's an upgrade from their forecast back in March and brings them in line with the Bank of England and indeed what we are forecasting as well. For 2026, they expect the economy to grow by 1.4%. Not great, and certainly a reduction from their previous forecast and still above everybody else's forecast. So they're still slightly optimistic compared to a lot of people. More positively, they do think inflation is coming down. Again, it's worth bearing in mind when we say inflation is coming down, prices are still rising, and they're also rising at a rate which is above the Bank of England's target. And that's likely to be the case for at least 2026. Probably by the end of 2027, we'll be seeing inflation back to target. But again, prices still growing by at least 2%. Also worth reminding ourselves, of course, the government's committed themselves to 3.5% of GDP to be spent over the next decade on defence spending. So that's a target to be achieved in 10 years' time. But to get to that target, we need to spend an extra £32 billion a year, for which the government hasn't really made any accommodation for in this budget. So that is a problem for another day, but it's going to be a very big problem one day. So Tracy, if you just go on to the next slide. So our conclusions really are that this is a kind of a sticking plaster budget, really. A lot of the problems are kicked down the road. From a financial markets point of view, it was a success. I think from Rachel Reeves' point of view, for a brief period anyway, it was a success too. They've kept the Labour backbenchers happy with more welfare payments. They've kept financial markets happy by really not rocking the boat. And they've kept the Office for Budget Responsibility happy as well, because what they're doing and what they're forecasting isn't really changing the debt dynamics of the UK over the long term. From our point of view, though, I think there are some frustrations here. This does feel like a budget really designed for political survival rather than sort of seeking to grow the economy, because those growth expectations of like 1.5% really are not good enough in the context of where the economy is or has been. So we need to get the economy growing more. There's a huge number of people unemployed. There's a huge number of people economically inactive as well. And there's not really many policies in this budget to really change things. And again, I'll take you back to before the election last year, when we, amongst others, were much more positive on the UK on expectations that the Labour government would do as they were promised to do and try and get economic growth up to about 2.5%. And they actually reiterated that promise in the budget last year, but there's really nothing in this budget that's going to get them anywhere near that. So that's quite a concern as we look forward from here. So Tracy, if you go on to the next slide. So just on the backdrop for the UK, as I say, I think it's worth reminding ourselves, if you go on to the next one, please, Tracy, we have been in a cycle for a little while now of weak economic growth, weak public finances, because the tax receipts are never as much as the government might hope. And of course, we've all seen the headlines about fiscal black holes. And this is all about basically the government having to raise additional money every time we have a budget to fill that fiscal black hole and balance the books. That means we are in a perpetual cycle of tax hikes and uncertainty, and obviously that's impacted consumer confidence, impacting consumer spending, and really has impacted both business investment and hiring as well. And then you just continue that cycle around and around. And I think, when we look at business investment, certainly what has happened in the last few months and what is predicted to come in the next few months isn't great, and that is a concern as well. Tracy, if you can go on to the next one. So this is a very long-term chart of UK economic growth over the period. So this is gross domestic product, so everything produced by the economy divided by the number of people in the country. And you can see we've actually been on a reasonable path up until the global financial crisis. So the dotted green line is the expected growth level based on where growth was from 1990 until the financial crisis. And then we've had a series of shocks which have really derailed the economy. This is not unique to the UK, but the UK does seem to be exceptionally damaged by this. So we had the financial crisis, then we had austerity, then we had the government really reining back on spending. We had the Brexit vote as well, which certainly impacted future growth, and then the COVID pandemic as well. And what you can see really is the trajectory for growth, as in how much growth is growing by every year, has really slowed, and that means the economy, is now growing by 1.5% rather than sort of 2.5% to 3% a year. Over time, of course, that just means the economy is not really becoming as competitive as it should be, certainly versus our international peers. Tracy, if you can go on to the next one. What is less bad, I guess, is the fact that the UK is not alone here. There's a lot of other countries who've got significant amounts of national debt. This is the G7, so the 7 biggest economies in the world. Certainly the group of very like-minded economies here in terms of how they're operated. And you can see the UK with debt to GDP as a ratio, so how much the government owes in total versus the entire size of the economy, is close to 100%. So the debt of the government is close to 1 year's complete output from the economy right now. As you can see, this is the dark blue line. The UK is about 2/3 of the way down. Other countries are in a worse situation. Japan, for example, is far worse. The problem the UK has got is this debt to GDP has grown very quickly since the financial crisis. So it's grown by almost 55% since the financial crisis. So the UK is not unique there. You can see a similar situation in the US. Others, such as Germany, much more sensible in terms of the government's finances, and they've got now room to manoeuvre. So Germany is a good example. Whereas the UK government has very limited room to spend money, Germany is spending €1 trillion next year on infrastructure spending and defence spending. We are going to be nowhere near that for a very long time. So if you can move on, Tracy, please. Thank you. So if we just go to the next slide, which is kind of just putting the UK in some context. So as I say, we are global investors. We think about the UK in the context of where we can put, our clients' money to try and get the best risk-adjusted return. And when we think about the UK, it's actually a small part of global markets these days. So the MSCI All Countries World Index is a global index of companies. And the UK, the entire market capitalization of all those UK listed companies in the FTSE 250 and 100 and beyond is just 3% of that index. Now, to put you some context, NVIDIA, a company you may have heard of, it's really one of these AI companies that really it's the world's most valuable company now, is over 5% in the same index. So one company in America is worth more than the entire market cap of the UK stock market right now. So, when we think about where we're putting clients' money, we can look around the entire world. And obviously, when we think about the rest of the world and where there is lots of growth right now, we see lots of opportunities, which is great. I mean, the UK is still almost a $4 trillion economy. It's the 6th biggest economy in the world, but we can look around and really find the most rewarding homes for clients' assets in terms of how we invest that. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see what we're thinking right now. We think global growth is pretty good. We don't really see any risks of recessions, i.e. economies really starting to shrink anywhere, and that's really helpful. We do think, and again, you may have heard some headlines over the last 12 months or so about tariffs, which is the US really slowing down global trade by putting taxes on goods coming into the US. That's something that's quite controversial. It's something that President Trump really thinks is a very good economic weapon to use. The question is now is how the process has been implemented may even be illegal, and that may well be changing. But we do think President Trump will continue to use tariffs. And again, that impacts international trade. Countries such as the UK have now done trade, what they describe as deals with the US, but actually the situation is worse than it was before. Interest rates are coming down. That's really helpful. In the US, they're cutting interest rates, and they'll be cutting rates in a couple of weeks' time. Bank of England, we expect to cut interest rates at the end of the month as well. I think it's the 18th of December. So hopefully a little Christmas present from the Bank of England. And then as we look into 2026, we expect the Bank of England to cut rates further over the course of the year. So base rate in the UK right now is 4%. We expect interest rates to be probably by this time next year 3.25%. And again, if the economy is slowing further, then we may well get further lower down towards about 3%. We shall see. Financial markets are very conscious of how much debt there is in the world right now. We do think that does pose some risks from time to time. We have seen that in the past. A good example was the mini budget from Liz Truss back in 2022, when bond markets really pushed back against the government spending too much money and not offsetting that with tax hikes. Elsewhere, we're very positive on the emerging markets, so countries like Brazil, China, India. We think there's lots of growth there, and there's certainly opportunities to invest for some very good long-term returns. We believe they've got a lot less problems with debt in some of the emerging markets, as they're called, than we actually have in the West now. We do think geopolitics is still an uncertain risk. We have had more positive headlines about the war between Russia and Ukraine in the last few days. That would be a fantastic outcome if that does come to an end. That would certainly help European equities very much, because they've really struggled because of the hike in energy prices, as we've all suffered around the world. Overall, we are still pretty positive on the world. We do think we prefer investing in equities rather than bonds, so listed companies rather than their debt for the moment. And in terms of where we like around the world, I mentioned already the UK is not one of our favourite markets for the moment. We prefer the USA and the emerging markets, where we do see lots of strong economic growth over the coming years. Now, the US is quite an expensive market right now, but we still like what we see. Tracy, if you can just go on to the next slide. So this is growth outlook for 2026 and 2025, which is the lighter blue line. I think there's some interesting things going on here. Germany is growing or will be growing a lot stronger next year because of what the government is doing. That's very helpful. I think when we look elsewhere, you can see on the right-hand side, you can see China, India, and the emerging markets, really, really strong growth there. And that's where we think there's going to be some good returns for the very long term. More locally, UK growth should be pretty stable next year. Elsewhere, the USA is obviously the world's biggest economy. We still expect that to grow quite nicely next year. Tracy, if you can go on to the next one, please. What we're thinking about right now before the end of the year, a few things. UK budget, we have some clarity, finally. The US government shutdown was something that happened in the US because they couldn't agree a budget. That's now ended. So the US government and all the civil service or equivalent in America is now back to work. What that has done in America is really make a mess of the economic data. Some of that data won't even be published now. And that makes life a little bit difficult in the short term to get a feel for how healthy the US economy is. But what we're learning so far is things are absolutely fine. I mentioned already the tariffs. We may well learn a little bit more about what comes next on those before Christmas. Again, another thing before Christmas is an important thing from our point of view is who is the leader of the Federal Reserve, which is the Central Bank of America, so the equivalent of the Bank of England. Jay Powell is the incumbent there. He's going to be replaced by President Trump, or he's stepping down. It's the end of his term. And he'll be replaced by probably a gentleman called Kevin Hassett, who's very close to President Trump already. Why does that matter? It matters because he'll cut interest rates quite aggressively. And when the US cuts interest rates, it's a good thing for the rest of the world. So that should be quite an interesting move. Overall, as I say, financial markets remain relatively calm. We see corporate earnings, so how much ultimately companies are making, as very positive and likely to grow further in 2026. And the economic backdrop, it's not fantastic. As I mentioned, UK growth isn't exactly brilliant, but it's pretty benign, and we don't see any recessions on the horizon, so we don't see economies shrinking. Tracy, if you can go on to the next one. So overall, the budget felt like a sticking plaster. We do think the structural issues in the UK around growth will remain in place. We do think that the long-term spending plans of the government are not sustainable. There's no ambition in this government. For a government that's got a majority of 169 seats and 4 years almost left to go until the next election, they haven't really got a very strong plan for growth here. And they really do feel like beholden to the backbenchers in terms of policy. Go on to the next one, please, Tracy. So just to wrap things up, really, if you just go on to the next slide, just to remind you all, because I think this is a really helpful slide. We always asked, we've had a very good run in financial markets this year. We do think that, generally you get markets going down from time to time. That's perfectly natural in financial markets. This year was a great example of that. And this is for the USA, so the world's most important stock market. In April this year, when President Trump announced those tariffs, the US stock market fell 19%, and everyone's like panicking. And we, this is our job. We have to sort of sit there and not panic and basically say, is there a good reason for this? Is this market just become basically cheap, or has something fundamentally changed? And our view was actually, obviously these tariffs are a problem, but they haven't changed the fundamentals of the US economy growing reasonably well and companies doing well as well. So we held our nerve. We continue to hold an overweight to US equities, and that's been very well rewarded. The US market is now up about, well, it's up a little bit more than that now, 17% or so. So that rebound from the lows that we saw in April, if you'd have not held your nerve and taken money out at that point, you'd have missed out on some very good returns this year. And I think, when we think about market returns, you will see periods where markets go down a lot. A recession is a good example of that. But overall, a lot of the time, it's invest for the long term and hold your nerve. So I think I'll stop there if that's okay. I know there's some questions, and I know we'll answer those offline if that makes sense. But I think I've taken up plenty of my time, so I'll pause there.
Anthony, thank you so much for that. That was a wonderful insight, and a canter through to cover all that in 15 minutes was incredible. So I can tell you've done 34 budgets. So well done. That was fantastic and a really great insight. And it was great that Anthony finished with that comment about holding your nerve, try and get rid of the noise that goes on. And Katie will often talk to clients about the importance of time in, not timing of the market. So time in is absolutely critical for the market. So one stat that Anthony covered there, I hadn't thought, and I don't know if anyone else had, but another £36 billion for defence spending over the course of this next Parliament and a bit longer is huge, and that's not even being counted for. So this definitely feels to me like it's a budget that we're spending now, and we're going to have to pay for it later. And it's also has a very strong political bias that Anthony mentioned. So for us, we think there are therefore more changes to come. We don't think this is the end of it by a long stretch. So if I can ask Tracy to go to the next slide, we sort of tend to think that these could be things up for grabs. Now, for example, pensions, tax-free cash was very strongly rumoured that there were going to be changes to that, either the amount you could take out or the sort of rates of taxation. Now, that didn't happen in this budget, and the Chancellor did come out 2 weeks beforehand to quash that rumour, by which stage, by the way, an awful lot of people have taken money out of their pension plans because of the fear that they were concerned with. They can't put it back in. So that rumour caused a massive issue. There's also concerns about the lifetime allowance. That was removed by the previous government. That could well come back into play. So those with large pension pots could get hit further down the road. So, as Katie said before, perhaps taking some of the money out now to reinvest it into other vehicles might be something to consider. And harmonisation of tax relief has often been trailed before. So will they bring tax relief down into one rate? So that would affect higher rate taxpayers quite significantly. So pension still feels like there could be more to go. IH gifting was also heavily trailed, that they would change the rules around gifting and perhaps push the amount of years further out. It didn't happen, but you can't but help think that might be on the agenda at some point. Release allowance and rates of taxation. Well, that would be a manifesto busting pledge that would have to be broken. And let's actually be honest about this. The rates of taxation would have ended up going up in this autumn budget had there not been that huge backbench rebellion when it was muted and Rachel Reeves did that early morning speech. So I can't help but think that's on the agenda at some point. ISA reform, could they change it even further? Could they change the thresholds? Could they bring things down, etc.? So ISAs could be in the headlights. Capital gains tax, the allowance is only £3,000 now, so that could well be taken away. And they could also consider, and they have done, equalisation with income tax levels. So again, the thresholds are 18 and 24%. If they were to bring those into 20% and 40%, that would have a significant impact upon people's capital gains tax allowance. So again, going back to what Katie said, is it now the time to pay some capital gains tax to get your money out of a portfolio and reinvest it into more efficient vehicles? So I think all this does check back to Katie's points. Council tax review, again, will they go after some of the other bands, the lower rated bands, and review those as well? Who knows? But it's already been happening to the more expensive properties. And lastly, will they stretch further and not just look at property, but go for other assets and bring in a wealth tax? So who knows? All this is speculation. None of it we have insight to, but we can only go on what we hear and read and see around us. But there are 7 more budgets of this government to go. So whether Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor or Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister, who knows? But they've got 7 more goes at this, and it doesn't look like it's going to let up. So with that in mind, there are many opportunities for planning to be revisited, for planning to be started, because it needs to be happening. So I'll pass you over to Katie, just she'll finish with some final comments, but thank you.
Thank you, Ian. So a few takeaways and action points. Well, as I said earlier, we start with reviewing wills and trusts. There's so much that can be done there. Making sure that we have up-to-date inheritance tax calculations on our estates. That's going to be even more important come April 27 when pensions fall into the value. So just keeping an eye on the increase as we go along, increasing liabilities. Reviewing those cash savings and ISA savings, as I said earlier, brilliant during working life, but actually not terribly helpful for estate planning. So reconsidering those is a good idea. Watching that £2 million threshold is going to be important for lots of our clients in order to preserve as far as possible the residence nil rate band. Thinking about those pension funds and inheritance tax planning. What can we do with the pensions now that potentially improves the situation for our loved ones? Yes, we might have to pay some more income tax, but actually the benefit to our loved ones by spending it on life insurance or investing in trust could be hugely advantageous. If you haven't had a look at our ultimate savings plan, the whole of life insurance and the discounted gift investments, please ask us for personalised figures and we'll be very happy to do that for you. Making sure that our families have the right protection in place, wills in place, trusts around life insurance so it doesn't just fall into their estate and compound the inheritance tax problem for them and their children. Every family is different challenges for everyone. So we recognise that and we'd love to talk to you about any concerns you have. Please contact us if you have any questions. Next slide, please, Tracy. One thing we haven't talked about specifically is what we're doing in the legacy protection business, but I think most of you know that the legacy protection business is set up to run alongside Montgomery estate planning so that we can bring the wills and trust side of planning into the investment and financial services side of planning so that we can support our clients to the maximum that we're able to. So I don't expect you to be able to read those tiny words in there. I can't see them. But if you've got any questions about wills and trusts, lasting powers of attorney, please let us know. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much to Anthony for joining us and being our guest speaker. Thank you for Steve's here, who works alongside us in the legacy protection. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. And thank you all for being here. And we'll be sending you links after we've finished. Thank you for attending.